Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for a very intimate conversation on a very important topic in our veteran community. The gentleman you see in your screen right here is Brett Waters. He started the group called Reason for Hope. And Brett, I would allow you to introduce yourself, but the way I met you was as an advocate for the veteran community that has suffered through suicidal crisis and the options that the VA or maybe Western medicine offers, and it just not being enough for this community. And so Brett has been an advocate to legalize for research and for usage safe psychedelics. And so we have covered this extensively with you and your organization and other groups and lawmakers as well, and of course, veterans. And we've been following the work that you've been doing nationwide and in Pennsylvania, Jersey, Delaware. So, Brett, if you could just give us an introduction and also tell us where the legislation stands to be able to legalize basically psychedelic medicine for the prevention of suicide in veterans. Go ahead, Brett.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Brett Waters. As you mentioned, I'm the co-founder of Reason for Hope and also an organization called the Veteran Mental Health Leadership Coalition, which is led by a retired three-star general, Martin Steele. It's also my co-founder of Reason for Hope, and brings together a number of stakeholders throughout the veteran community who are all pushing in the same direction, to expand the research and expand access ultimately to evidence-based psychedelic therapies, because as you mentioned, we are in a crisis. This is an issue that's very personal for me. I lost my grandfather, who was a veteran, to suicide when I was very young. And then I lost my mom to suicide 5 years ago. Her name was Sherry Hope Waters, and that's where Reason for Hope's name came from. I think I personally, just like many in the veteran community, have experienced the frustrations with the current system of care and the treatments that are available. And the truth is just that we need more options. And right now we have breakthrough therapies, and this is not my term. This is what the FDA says. The FDA, has awarded breakthrough therapy designations to MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD, which is obviously a very difficult to treat condition that is plagues not just the veteran community, but people throughout our society, but veterans in particular. We also have breakthrough therapy designations that the FDA has awarded for psilocybin. Two different psilocybin companies have received this, one to treat major depressive disorder, another for treatment-resistant depression. And we know that these are the conditions that frequently lead to suicide. And so if we have these breakthrough therapies, we need to be doing much more to expand and fund the research into those treatments and to make them available, at least for compassionate use, for people who don't have time to wait. And that's what we're really pushing right now, to make
So
sure
that's exactly where I want to pick up with you, Brett. There's so many directions we can take this in. But first things first, is it legal to use psychedelic medicine in the state of Pennsylvania?
So there is some people consider ketamine to be, it's not a classic psychedelic, it's a dissociative, but ketamine is frequently used off-label for the treatment of depression at clinics throughout the state. It's FDA approved as an anesthetic. You have esketamine is an FDA approved medication, but as to MDMA and psilocybin, it is not. Those are the two that appear the closest to coming through FDA approval, and we need them to be available as soon as that happens. So people are going to be able to use these through, doctors will be able to prescribe them, patients will be able to access them, and there are separately pushes for legalization outside of the FDA process, but that is not taken hold in Pennsylvania.
So, it's interesting because obviously with all things VA, when we first met, we've been doing this collaboration between our station and the network, and other stations have joined this collaboration as well to better cover the veteran community. And one of the conversations that has come up is how you have organized veteran communities state by state to be able to lobby for this before Congress. So talk about what that effort looks like on the ground when the veteran goes. It's a bipartisan response in support. Is that right?
We've had unbelievable bipartisan support for this, both in Pennsylvania and in Congress.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to testifying on Tuesday before the House Veteran Affairs Health Subcommittee. We have a
Mhm.
bill in Congress right now that we have been pushing called the Breakthrough Therapies Act. In the House, it's HR 1393, and Madeline Dean from Pennsylvania is our lead sponsor in the House. In the Senate, it's Cory Booker and Rand Paul. And what this bill is doing is saying that because these psychedelic medicines with MDMA and psilocybin, for example, have a Schedule One drug as the active ingredient, there is no way to access those under the Right to Try Act for
Okay.
compassionate use for people who have tried everything else, and they're subject to the highest barriers to research. Now, that doesn't make any sense when the FDA says something is a breakthrough therapy. That means it shows promise that it might be substantially better than anything we currently have to offer. So if the FDA is saying that and they're trying to accelerate access, we can't have them be, Schedule One medicines that are slowed down in the research process through those DEA regulations. And so
Sure.
our bill is simply trying to reschedule from Schedule One to Schedule Two in advance of FDA approval. That
So,
reduces research barriers and opens for compassionate use under the Right to Try Act.
what's your biggest barrier, Brett? Where does it stop?
So the incredibly frustrating thing that's going on right now, and in especially the veteran community, is that people are forced to either leave the country to
Mhm.
access these elsewhere or to risk criminal prosecution to save their own lives. And so if any other medication that's eligible for access under the Right to Try Act, it's shown to be safe, even if it's not FDA approved yet. If your doctor says, well, you've tried everything else and this is the best potential option that we have left for you,
Right.
you should be able to access. You shouldn't have to leave the country or risk criminal prosecution. If you can access that medication safely with doctor supervision, that should be an option here. And that is one thing that our bill is seeking to change. And the other is making it easier to do that research, because that'll speed up the process for FDA approval and for widespread potential access to the veteran. And that's
So I
really
have
what
a
we're.
question for you from the audience here. We have Rayanne Larimer. And Rayanne, if I could ask you to give a little bit more detail to your question, Miss, I would love to get you the best answer from Brett here. She says, what if you can't take medications out there? She has hereditary generalized dystonia, neurological movement disorder. Many medications can actually cause involuntary muscle movements. So I don't know, Brett, if you know if that particular condition has something to do with this medicine that we're discussing right now. If it does, and please address it. If not, Rayanne, if you could please give us a little bit more detail, and we'll circle back to your question. What do you think, Brett?
Sure. So I mean, I'm not a doctor or researcher, so I certainly would
Right.
say that that is
Sure.
something that you would have to take to somebody with much more expertise in
Right.
this specific issue. Happy to
Sure.
refer to our chief science officer, Dr. Lynette Averill, who's a professor at
Yes.
Baylor College of Medicine and works in the VA as a clinical
Right.
research psychologist. But we
So, Rayanne, it's not that we don't want to take your question. It's just we're not going to be best suited to answer. But by all means, if you want to give us more detail as to how this pertains to psychedelic medicine and give us a little bit more info, by all means, please do.
So I will
Let's.
say that this
Yep.
is there are a lot of people suffering from a lot of different conditions that because of the Schedule One status of these medicines, like everything, all of the research has been slowed down. So there may be a number of different indications that psychedelic medicines have promise for treating, and unfortunately, the research into all of them is being slowed down right now. So there's, I think, one of the really unique areas of promise is, we're seeing with psilocybin, for example, it is shows promise for things ranging from, depression to eating disorders to, helping to treat suicidal ideation and PTSD and all sorts of conditions. And that's really why I think, when you have something that shows so much potential across indications, we need to
Right.
be doing a whole lot more to advance that research. We need funding. We need, to reduce those
Yep.
barriers, and we need to be expanding eligibility to,
Mhm.
include people in clinical trials who are often
Right.
excluded because pharmaceutical companies are incentivized to keep their, patient populations very narrow and sort of try to get the cleanest data they can for FDA
Yeah.
approval.
So
There's a
this is
lot
interesting. I'm glad you said that, Brett, because it leads me into this question and to also help our partners at Nightly News that are covering this as well this evening. It's really interesting to see how you're stalled in some sections, but yet, listen to this, guys. MDMA for PTSD, and for the first time in more than 20 years, there could be an FDA-approved treatment for PTSD. We know how incredibly pervasive PTSD has been in the veteran community. So this new treatment is, of course, as we know, MDMA. A lot of people know it as ecstasy. You have been in the know of all the research that has happened into ecstasy for the use of PTSD. So combined with therapy, we've seen the numbers. 86.5% of people had reduced symptoms. But that's only in combination, right? Because we've been to one of these therapies where you see the person go under the influence of this, and you really do need someone at your side to say, let's flush out all the trauma that the medicine is bringing back up. So apparently the standard treatments work in just 50% of people. The data is going to be submitted to the FDA by the end of this year, and then the agency has to make a decision in 6 months. So obviously this is going to be a really important story that we've been following from Pennsylvania. We've been talking to Cory Booker through you with him for nearly a year and a half now. So what makes this story, actually the producer of this report is a combat veteran. He knows the issue from the inside. You almost need that intimate knowledge of the condition, Brett, so that when you hear, wait, ecstasy for PTSD, it sounds so radical, but then you realize what these veterans have been through and what is out there for them. So talk about, there's a huge question there for you, so roll with me, but talk about exactly how big of a deal being at this stage of FDA approval is after all these years.
It's a huge deal, and I would say if people really kind of like step back and think about it for a second, it is entirely logical why MDMA with therapy would help someone with PTSD. To
Talk
help
about
open
that.
you up and to be able to face traumas that maybe are really really deeply held and ingrained like in your body. It is makes a whole lot of sense why MDMA paired with that therapeutic support would be like an ideal treatment for people with PTSD rather than kind of what the status quo SSRI treatments we have that often patients describe as numbing the symptoms and actually can make it more difficult for you to be able to address them through therapy and really get to the root cause of the trauma and be able to move on with your life, medication free, which is what a lot of patients, are really hope for. They don't want to be on chronic medication. And so I think that's really what the promise is here. It's these are rapid acting treatments that can really go deep. And we're really optimistic about FDA approval there, and it's going to be a game changer for people not just in Pennsylvania but around the country.
So this is so fascinating, Brett. When we worked on this story last year, a year ago, this Veterans Day, Patrick Martin is the producer's name, and Dr. John right now, who isn't, he's a reservist. He is currently out of the country finishing his reserve duties. So Patrick is working with another correspondent on this story, but we started this coverage last Veterans Day. We prepared a story on where it was. This is when we met you at the conference in New York, talking about where it stood back then, and just watching the people through the clinical study at the VA by Dr. Rachel Yehuda in combination with Mount Sinai. And we learned all about what the promise is for veterans and how it can prevent suicide. So talk about, this is so important because we're still waiting on the suicide report. They're about 3 weeks late. They say it's coming. It's from the VA. The VA is about 3 weeks late on giving us their fiscal year report for how many more or how many fewer veterans are taking their lives. But in that time, Dr. Yehuda has been working on this clinical trial for a year. Talk about where that trial stands, and is it going to be something that just open, like it's just a water hose? We're all going to be drinking out of this water hose soon of options, kind of like how we're seeing with the diabetic medications that people are using for weight loss, like this huge spout of options now. Is that what it's going to look like? You think that all of these medicines are going to hit at the same time?
So no, I don't think it's quite going to look like that because again, these are the FDA approval process can be the process to do the research, collect the data, achieve FDA approval can be slow and frustrating, and MDMA has been going through that process for like decades now. It seems it is
How long?
just,
Tell us about it.
uh,
Yes, tell us because
so
obviously there's
that's
a lot of social opinion on MDMA where everyone can agree that people want to lose weight, right?
right. So the part of the delay with MDMA was because MAPS, the company, was bringing it through as a nonprofit. They had to raise money. It was not taking the traditional pharmaceutical approval pathway, and
Right.
that was one of the things that made the process take longer. And as I mentioned, it's harder with Schedule One drugs. There's been no government funding or support to bring this through, and so
Yep.
psilocybin, MDMA, hopefully by the end of next year we could see it available by 2025. And what we want to make sure is that there are clinicians who are trained and ready to provide this inside and outside the VA.
Okay.
And so we have a lot of people who are going to need to be trained and prepared to offer this. And psilocybin might be a couple of years after, but we really need to be training people to be ready to offer both of these medications. And what we need to also be doing is the research into how well they can potentially work together. And these are things that
Mm-hmm.
are going
Mm-hmm.
to take, it costs money to do this research, and we really need government support to help make sure that we can answer these questions on how safely and effectively
Right.
these work for a broad number of conditions that contribute to suicide. And that's a crisis that everybody recognizes. We need to be
Yeah.
doing something much bolder to address it, and we have that opportunity right now. So it's frustrating how long it's taken to get to this
Sure.
point, and it's time that the government steps up and really helps to unlock this research and answer a lot more questions that we need answers to.
Last question for you, Brett, because obviously, we have spoken about this for a long time before, over and over again, because each little baby step that the government takes is a whole new conversation as to what could this mean. But the story that we did last year showed veterans that have gone to other countries to do ayahuasca, to do ibogaine, to do psilocybin, because they're desperate. And there are nonprofits that are willing to pay for it. I know that your nonprofit has split the costs with another nonprofit to be able to pay for ketamine treatment, which is legal in the United States under a doctor's care. Um, but what are the risks? How do you not use this? How do you pick who you go see in some other country so that you literally don't die in some charlatan's hands that know that this is a huge black market? And then, first part of the question, second part of the question is, and I'll wrap it up with this, is what happens if you are misusing it in this country right now? Do you go to jail? Do you have any kind of amnesty if you are a PTSD patient? Talk about that because there's a lot of desperation to just feel better in this community.
Yeah, it's a really tragic, and it makes it difficult. The government's position and the position that they've put advocates in to have to go out there and talk about this openly is very challenging because every time do an interview or another article's written, the emails come flooding in from people who are I've tried everything else, like I have this condition, it's not just PTSD, it's 10 other things, they don't qualify for clinical trials, and they're desperate. And that's really the tragedy here is like there are people who just cannot afford to wait, and we need more flexibility in our laws to be able to ensure that those people can get access in the United States even before FDA approval. These medicines should be treated like anything else, and they should be eligible for access under the Right to Try Act. And it does need to be easier to do that research so more people are included in the trials, and people aren't forced to go outside the country. And I would just caution everybody like that, to be very well educated on the risks and the benefits, and make sure that you're, connecting with nonprofits out there who, are sponsoring people to leave the country. It's very difficult to get off those waiting lists to be able to get funding. I mean, I think there's, most of the nonprofits who are helping send people outside the United States have waiting lists of around 1,000 plus people right now. So it's very challenging, and it's a tragic situation. We recently had about 20 some members of the Veteran Mental Health Leadership Coalition testify in Kentucky before the Opioid Abatement Advisory Commission on their experiences with ibogaine in Mexico. And one of our advisors testified that he has personally treated over 800 patients with ibogaine, and this clinic, the Mission Within in Mexico, was treated over 1,000 veterans in the last 6 years. And that those numbers are just completely unacceptable. Like, we need to be able
That's
to do
incredible.
that research and, start to enable access here in the United States. I think it just goes to show that, like, it's not just MDMA and psilocybin. There are all of these
Sure,
other things that are hopefully coming through the pipeline, and
sure.
we need more options. There's never going to be one treatment that works for everyone. MDMA is
So
going to
last
help
question,
a ton of
because I,
people.
I do want to honor Rayanne. Oh, sorry to interrupt you, Brett. The signal's a little strange, so I apologize if it seemed that way. One of the things that she commented on, she gave us a little bit more info. She says, if you do take MDMA, is it safe to drive? Is it safe to do other things? Just to be clear, you can't take MDMA right now legally. So there's that. And this is one of the things that you want to fight for, is to be able to use it under the Safe to Try Act. But she's asking, as it pertains to contraindications and with other SSRIs. I mean, this is sad. Like, the fact that we're still trying to figure out per condition, per contraindication, how we can get mental health issues in line. See if you can address Rand's question for her.
Sure. So to be very clear, like with MDMA, this is not going to be something that certainly you wouldn't be able to drive under the influence of MDMA, and is not going to be available likely for take home use, certainly not at first. It's going to be something that is done, in the clinic. So you will
Right.
have, preparation sessions to prepare for the experience. You are under, clinical
Mhm.
supervision and, therapeutic support for, it's usually at least about a 6 hour period of time. Uh,
Yeah,
you know, it will take hours of kind of follow up oversight, and sometimes people have to stay overnight the
sure.
next day. So the experience could vary by patient, but ultimately, then there's the follow up therapeutic support, and this is sort of a package of treatment with the medication, assisted therapy with MDMA. So it's
Hmm.
not just like a take home medication, and
Yeah,
certainly, would not be able to drive. And yes, if you're using
sure.
this outside of, anything with MDMA outside of the research context right now is illegal, and same with
Yeah,
psilocybin. So unfortunately,
yeah.
only eligible to access them right now because of Schedule 1, through these research protocols, and then eventually, doctors will be able to prescribe them, and at
Sure.
least at first, that's likely to be done only in clinic with that doctor and therapist supervision.
So let's wrap up here for the sake of time. Brett, you're always generous with your time for our audience. So if you can monitor any kind of follow-up questions on this feed, it's going to be up for a little while. But guys, we are going to tackle many other topics tonight at 7:30 on American Vets Beyond the Battlefield. This is our Philadelphia, New Jersey, Delaware centric show, but we will have a link to all of the coverage that we have provided in the last year and a half on what Brett is talking about, and many other topics like the PACT Act and other suicide awareness causes, and then just some really good feel good stories, like our beloved Sheila Wacko jumping out of a plane. Actually, she didn't jump. She went up with the guys who jump from our one of our parachute units in the Army. So it'll inform you, it'll entertain you, and hopefully just keep the conversation going, so we can keep the veteran community on the forefront, and just use the day to be able to make people go, huh, I didn't know that. So Brett Waters from Reason for Hope, thank you so much for always being available to us.
Thank you so much.